to take it there. And in the midst of that, we decided to have a program or community leaders be a part of that program before I gave my speech. I didn't want any elected officials. I didn't really want anyone from the business leadership. I wanted to hear from the community, and I wanted the community to hear from some of their leaders. And so what we decided to do was to invite various people from across the community to be a part of that. And again, this was all hastily done because it was a matter of tense moments during that time. And I think if many of us can recall, there were cities going up in flames, and there was a lot of damage and civil unrest being done across communities, and we were all preparing for it. And so to say that the level of tension was high is an understatement. And so it was high for many days, from those of us who first witnessed the video, as I did on social media, the morning that it was posted, all the way through the protests that we had here in Montgomery. And so it was a tough day, but we decided to reach out to some community leaders and ask others for names. And one of the names that was mentioned was Charles Lee. And so on our way, I decided to ask Charles Lee to meet me at the Alabama Democratic Conference auditorium for a meeting. I didn't want to do the meeting here at City Hall because I really wanted to make sure that we were out in the community, touching the community in a way that did not seem to be fortified by city government. And so during the course of that meeting, it became very, very apparent to me that Mr. Lee did not come there as a helper to calm the community. He came out of an interest in personal gain. He came to shake me down. He came to extort the mayor of this city, at which on a day when tension was already as high as it could be, it went even higher. And it went higher because I was offended that others in the community who look at him as a role model and as someone who had been a leader would take that opportunity. The pain of a family, not only in Minneapolis, but the pain of a community across this country, to try to extort, shake down, or get money out of the city, which he's not from, but the city that has embraced him and his charity. And so what you hear in splices of the manipulated audio is an angry person who is frustrated and is very, very displeased, to put it mildly, with someone who has gotten the confidence of many leaders in this community asking about where his money is and where is the $30,000 that purportedly was promised to him by a previous administration. And so you hear me frustrated, you hear me angry, and you hear a level of tension in my voice that most people probably won't hear because we aren't in that position. And at the time, looking back, and I thought about this almost immediately, I should have gotten up and left. I didn't leave because I didn't want to walk out on a community leader who may have said something in error, may have gotten over his skis a little bit on a day when we had the potential for major unrest. However, it was further in that conversation, which is not including the audio, that Mr. Lee then said what would happen if he didn't get any money, if he wasn't paid. Not only electorally as it relates to black votes and white votes, but what would happen to the city. And so in the moment, my outrage grew even more, because now I went past the fact of money for me and my organization. It went to what I'm willing to do to burn this city down, to be a gaslighter. And that, during that time, was a very offensive approach, and it was something that really, to be honest with you, called into questions of my manhood. And probably outside of this position, I would have taken a different approach to someone during that time bringing that up. And so what you heard was verbal frustration and anger at someone who was literally taking the opportunity of so much pain in this country to use it for their personal profit. There was no one else in the room but one person that Mr. Lee brought with him, and I think he was there for part of the time. There were no other leaders or activists in that particular meeting. And so after that conversation, we had to go over to E.D. Nixon Elementary School, where we were met with many community members who were outraged and frustrated. And we gave a speech that I put together about understanding the need for more trust and transparency between our police department and our community. I apologize then for those that had not had the same opportunities that many others had had, and we allowed Mr. Lee to speak on that program. And only out of the interest of the overall goal of staying with those who thought that he would be a good advocate for the community did I allow him to speak. I decided not to prosecute at that time because I believed, after talking to community leaders and civic leaders, that it was the right thing to do. I was wrong. We should have prosecuted then, and we should have called into question what Mr. Lee's motivations were. However, it would not be until sometime later that we would learn that there was an audio recording, which I never knew about at the time. And at that time, Mr. Lee again asked for money in exchange for destroying the tape. Now, as an officer of the court for almost 7 years, I know what that is. And I'll be willing to testify under oath to what exactly happened, not only that day, but in subsequent days when this tape was shopped to many outlets, and it was shopped for sale as a way to extort this city and the mayor of this city. I talked with elected officials, and I talked with other civic leaders who asked me not to move forward because of the good they thought he might be doing in the community. Well, I think that looking at it now, we can see that probably was not the right step to take. They had been fooled like many others in the community, and they didn't know that they were dealing with a hustler, a shyster, and a liar. And that's who many have been dealing with when it comes to Charles Lee. And so when you hear a manipulated, doctored audio clip that has me talking as if I'm talking to myself, ask the question, why was this person recording it? Who else do they record? What was the overall intent of the recording? Ask yourself just some basic questions of why on that day, in a meeting at the Alabama Democratic Conference headquarters outside of City Hall, would someone try to utilize that for personal gain and personal profit? And so I want us to understand that we are here not because of any other reason, but someone who has an ulterior motive, which is to undermine this administration and the work that we have been doing. But I want to make it very clear that my views of the people of this city are not reduced to an hatchet job of some sideshow who wants to be more important than he is. I'm the mayor of every citizen of this community. I respect their concerns and dreams, and I know I need to earn their trust as well as their votes. I've been very direct as mayor about the state of race relations and the need to lift all of our community. I feel an obligation to do that as the first black mayor of this city. And I get the opportunity to speak to the pain of this city and the progress of this city. I have these conversations regularly, in private and in public. Members of the white community, black community, biracial, Muslim, Hispanic community, local, state, and national. I think that's my responsibility, is to have the tough talks. Because as mayors, sometimes that's what we have to do. We have to have those kind of talks about where we are. And so while I regret some of the bad language that is now public, part of the extortion attempt was that I needed to give Mr. Lee this money in order to help get white votes and black votes. Well, as someone who has been in elected office since 2012 and who was the only person to win a countywide race and a citywide race, I know where votes are, and I know that votes are important. And I want to say this, no one ever has to question my understanding of black votes and black voters in not only this city, this state, or this nation. I grew up in it, I participated in it, and I lead it. And so I understand the importance of black voters, because without black voters, I wouldn't have been probate judge. Without black voters, I wouldn't be mayor. But without building that coalition beyond, we cannot move further as a city. We wouldn't have had a multiracial, multicultural, 67% percentage of voters with just black voters. But we understand the importance of everyone who participates in the process. And so my objection to the threat of, if you don't give money, then we are going to do X, Y, and Z to make sure you don't get reelected, was taken in a way that I would take any type of challenge. It was taken in a way that I would respond, and that's direct and that's forceful. And so I want each and every one of you to know that I will not, and no one in my administration will ever be strong-armed into anything. We'll never be shaken down. We'll never allow that to happen. I realize that because that's my personal creed. Irrespective of my titles politically, that's who I am in the morning, that's who I am when I go to sleep. And so I know that to be a mayor for everyone, it's important to have this clearing of the air. And it's important for us to set the record straight and to have a moment of clarity. Because when you take a manipulated audio clip and you take something that's been chopped and screwed, as we used to say, you take something that's been remixed and hijacked and you purport it to be authentic, that's not only dangerous for me as the mayor, that's dangerous for any elected official, any public official, and anyone else who's in a private conversation with someone who may have ulterior motives. And so I want us to be aware of that, and I want us to understand why we're here. Because one man decided to put his personal gain over the benefit and well-being of this community during a time of crisis. And that's something that everyone needs to understand. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you for your interest, and I'd be more than willing to take any questions that you may have. Yes?
Mayor Charles Lee said he did not take that video. He did not release that video. He said he was the only community
Charles Lee is a liar, he's a shyster, and he's a hustler. Let me be absolutely clear about that. Charles Lee shot that tape for the last 3 years. Civic leaders know that, elected officials know that. And when we file a complaint with the district attorney's office about this, they will have the opportunity to present that under oath. I have no issue with that, and I have no issue testifying to that. And we'll see if he wants to do the same, or if anyone who's connected to him will do the same as well. At this point, absolutely. If this is where we are, then sure, that's what we're going to do. We're going to protect the integrity of the mayor's office at all times. We're going to protect the integrity of city government at all times. And when somebody breaches that and steps across that line, and they aren't willing to be talked down by, be it supporters of theirs, or they aren't willing to listen to people who may be advisors, then we'll let the legal process take its course. And again, as an officer of the court, there's not anything I said to you today I'm not willing to testify to under oath. You have to talk to the district attorney about that. I think that means that we need to move forward with a complaint. And I think it's important for us to understand that in the aftermath of this, my chief of staff and outside legal advisor did meet with the district attorney. And so we have had a previous conversation, and the choice was left up to us about moving forward with charges at that time. And again, at that time, we appealed to the better angels. We were hoping to at least, and we did not move forward, but we were wrong to do that in hindsight, and so we would take those next steps now. Well, I don't know who else he's recorded. I think that'd be a better question for Charles Lee. I don't know that anyone who's been recorded will be impacted. Again, that's a question for the district attorney and how they will move forward with that. Yes, ma'am. You know, Charles Lee had been calling on the office probably since shortly after I was elected. And apparently he had, access to the previous administration that he did not have with me. That may be a sense of entitlement that he may have felt. I never asked my predecessor about what conversations they may have or not have had. I only deal with things as they relate to my administration. And I think even if there are any agreements, that doesn't give you the right to try to extort or shake down the CEO of a city. And that's any city in the state of Alabama. That's not just Montgomery. And I think that this is, a lot bigger than just myself. This, again, calls into question other elected officials and how they have to interact, because there are strict guidelines on what we can do and what we can't do, but the public is not necessarily, does not necessarily have to operate in those same guidelines that we do. So when someone does something as egregious as this, and again, I want to go back to the timing of this. I mean, this is disgusting. When you consider what was going on, and for any of you in the media, you go back and you look at what you were writing and you were sharing on social media on that day. And I think that we'll understand why, again, tensions were as high, as they were. The incident itself was bad enough. The uncertainty of what was happening in communities had not reached that level in decades in most cities. And so I think when, you consider a person that had been held out or purported to be a leader to go to that length of bringing up something they may have felt was owed to them. The city of Montgomery doesn't owe any nonprofit anything. Let me be very clear, not one. The city of Montgomery and the city council do that out of their priorities and out of our goodness of being stewards of taxpayer dollars. And that's why since that time I haven't allocated or authorized any dollars to go to this charity. It wasn't anything personal. We do that for 99.9% of the requests that we have. But I think for anyone who is willing to extort a public official, I don't think they're worthy of city money, county money, state money, or any other public dollars. Now, that's my personal opinion. Yes, ma'am. I think in the back. No? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Well, I think those views were taken out of context, to be blunt with you. I think those were strongly manipulated. We've had a great relationship with Maxwell Air Force Base. We we worked with them to help pass a school referendum. They were very, very supportive of that. I've had great relationships with the generals there, the Air University commanders. And, one of the things that, came up was, we even came up a little bit during the campaign, was the concern about losing Maxwell. My thought has always been not only stabilizing Maxwell's presence here, but growing it and making sure they're part of the community. And I'm glad that some of those conversations have involved them doing more now with the city of Montgomery and the communities in Montgomery than they were doing prior to that. And so we value their presence, we understand the impact, and we certainly respect and appreciate the service of all of our men in our armed forces here, whether it be at Maxwell, Gunner, the Air National Guard, and so forth. Yes, I'll come right back to you.
Mayor,
Yes.
given in the context of that, why did you say what you said on the tape about not caring about Maxwell? The comment that you made about they need to do something that I care about, they need to do something about Maxwell. Why did you say that?
Well, I don't think that was a complete statement. Again, I think anytime you have a audio clip that has been selectively edited like this, that to me calls into question all of it. And so there are some parts that I can remember very vividly. I don't remember what Mr. Lee asked me or what his statement was at that time about Maxwell Air Force Base. I'll just say this. My wife's uncle is a former four-star general. There aren't a lot of black Air Force four-star generals in the history of the Air Force. My brother-in-laws went to the United States Air Force Academy. I got to know General Cotton, who's now a four-star general in the Air Force while he was here, General Hecker, and now getting to know General Tullis. So I certainly understand their leadership and their passion for not only our nation, but freedom in this world. And so I don't yield that to anyone. At the same time, we've had conversations, and I've had with all of them, about what they can do to be more part of the community. And most of them have asked, how could they be more part of Montgomery? How can we break down the barrier between the walls of the military installation and this community? And so we're seeing more programming, we're seeing more interaction in that. But again, I think that's the danger. And let me be very specific. I think the media has to be very careful. I think the media has some really hard questions to answer themselves. Because when you purport something that has been that cut up, I talk to a lot of people on a daily basis. Now, I could cut up a lot of conversations. Be with the governor, it could be with a congressman, it could be with some CEO. Are we going to now just take any piece of information that somebody's been shopping around for 3 years, selling it to the highest bidder, and purport that as being authentic? If I go out and I have a lunch right after this is over, and I'm with someone, can someone then Photoshop that and then make that picture and get it to one of the news outlets as being authentic? Maybe it's me with an envelope in my hand. Maybe it's me meeting with someone and there's something else that's happening. I think the media has some responsibility in this as well. And I think it's not just any one outlet. I think that all have to really check and decide what are we going to determine is legitimate. Because when we get into the media being confused with what someone puts up on their Facebook page or what someone puts up on their own social platform, then we get into really uncertain territory. And I think we don't want to break off the communication with the media. We don't want to have to break off communication with the public. But I do think it's important for us to make sure everybody is being accountable. Because when you take a doctored clip, one that by all accounts people will acknowledge has been doctored, That's a problem because many of our citizens, many of our residents take that as being authentic. And I think that's the question for everyone to consider. Yes, sir. And then I'll come right to you. I'll come right back to you, Sally. Sorry. Sure. What comments? Well, it depends on which ones you're talking about. Well, some of them I do, depends on the context. It depends on the context of what you're talking about. Well, you just asked me 3 questions. Yes, sir. Just an initial meeting was had with the district attorney, and at that time they gave my chief of staff, Chip Hill, and legal advisor Peck Fox some information about what they thought had happened based on how the information was relayed to them, and then what our next steps were or could be. And what we decided to do was to not move forward at that time. No, I don't know the investigation has started at this time. I think there will be subsequent steps for us to take before that. Sally, no, you know, I'm sorry. Well, the fact that it's not a two-way conversation is doctor. All right? What were the questions? What was the topic of conversation that we were having? What was said prior to that? So I don't deny having an elevated level of tension on the day of June 1st, 2020 whatsoever. I don't deny being offended by someone taking that as a time to try to extort the city of Montgomery whatsoever. So again, while I regret the language being made public, a lot of the conversation was initially about how do we keep the community safe? How do we keep the community calm? And that conversation instantly went to money and a payoff. And so for me, that's a problem. A lot of what we talk about in that meeting got outside of the realm of the day's events, which were protests around the murder of George Floyd, and got into other things that were happening and who said what and he said this and that, or what would happen if you don't do this, or what would happen if you don't do that. So listen, in hindsight, 3 years in, as I am now, I would have gotten up and left at the first mention of money. At the time, my thought was, well, I don't want to cut this meeting short with a community leader because I don't want to treat him any different than I would a CEO or any other leader in the community. And so we talked, and the conversation got animated back and forth. But for some reason, his statements and questions aren't on the audio clip. So I think we just have to kind of keep that in mind. Am I getting the hook? I'm sorry? I would call on Charles Lee or whoever he has sold the clip to that has the full audio clip. So whoever has bought it and whoever paid him for it to post it, that's who I would call on and do that. So maybe it'll magically appear after 3 years. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. That was everything from, we'll make sure that, you don't get any black votes or in the community, or we'll tell the folks that you aren't doing what you said you were going to do, to I'll tell Karen Jones, tell everybody we need to burn the city down. We need to tear everything up on that day. And so those were some of the statements that were made along with many others. Yes, sir. One more? Okay. Get somebody. I'm sorry, Sally. Well, I don't know if I heard disapproval. I would just ask them to think about where things are now they've heard the full story. None of them asked me the full story. So those that knew part of the story, I think, have a better understanding of it. So I think that this may help, not only with the council, but with the community. Again, I think perspective is key in this. You know, let me take a moment of personal privilege. You know, 7 years on the bench in the probate court here in Montgomery County, I never had a complaint. I never had any issues of impropriety. I'm born and raised in Montgomery. I've got character witnesses from the time I was in St. Margaret's Hospital, February 20, 1974, all the way through now. So I'm not somebody who just magically appeared here. I'm not somebody who just magically created some myth around some story of what I'm doing or can't point to the results of what I've done. So from my standpoint, if there's someone who doesn't know me, it's because they don't want to know me that's on this council. There are enough people who can not only testify to who I am personally, but who can testify to who I am professionally and politically. And that's why I've always let my actions speak more than my words. Because I think at the end of the day, it matters less about what you say and more about what you do. And that's how I've always operated. All right? Thank you all so much. Thank you.